Today is the Crafting for a Cause challenge, and I'm back with more quick and easy Dollar Tree DIYs. I've got 3 different projects that are duplicates of much more expensive versions, so snuggle up with a blanket and your favorite warm drink while I show you how to get the look for less. For my first project today, I'm recreating this silver beaded rope garland I saw on the Pottery Barn website for $79, and for that price, I really hope that it's real silver. I started out with these Christmas balls from Dollar Tree. These are a little more gold than the original version, but you'll see that we're going to change that a little bit later. And I noticed that the original balls from Pottery Barn had a distressed look to them, so I took some 220 grit sandpaper and used it to scuff up the ornaments. Next, I grabbed my hot knife and trimmed off the little spouts from the top of the balls. If you don't have a hot knife, you can create your own by holding a utility knife under a flame for a few seconds and use that. I will say that this tool was one of my better craft tool purchases in 2020 and has come in handy for lots of things. It has several attachments, so it's also a wood burning tool. I'll link the one that I have in the description box below. I think I got it from Amazon, and I'll also link one of my wood burning projects above if you'd like to see that too. Next, I used the burner tool to puncture a hole in the bottom of each of the balls as well. And while I'm doing that, I'll mention that today's video is part of the Crafting for Cause challenge, hosted by Teresa B DIY and co-hosted by Crafted by Corey. I'll link both of their channels as well as the playlist in the description box below. But most of all, I want to mention the cause that they're highlighting this month, called Morgan's Light, a nonprofit working to raise awareness about toxic teen relationships. I'll link their website in the description box as well, and we'll be sharing a little more later in this video. So back to the project. In addition to the scuff marks on the original balls, I noticed that they also had some areas where there was color variation and a matte finish where they had lost their luster a little bit. I tried to mimic this by using my dry brush to apply some Granite Gray by Apple Barrel Paints. Just like in other projects, I used my chippy brush and dipped it ever so slightly into the paint, dabbed most of it off on a paper, and then brushed it onto the surface sparingly around the balls. And here's a quick side-by-side so you can see the difference that this dry brushing added. So I couldn't find my longer upholstery needles, but that was okay. I just made a makeshift needle using some jewelry wire. The best part about this was that I didn't have to thread a needle. I just bent the wire around my twine and used pliers to flatten where the wire was bent. If you don't have thicker wire like this, I bet floral wire might work, or even a toothpick with the twine taped to it could work. Just something long enough to poke through to the other side. Now, the one nuisance about this project is that you have to start with a super long piece of twine. I think the one I was working with was about 8 feet long, but that ended up being a little more than I needed, so probably about 6 feet would probably do. So there you see me pulling it through after threading the first ball. I left about 12 inches on the other side of the ball and just tied a few knots, creating one big knot to create the end of the garland. Next, I did the same thing on the other side of the ball to hold it tightly in place. In the beginning, this took a little extra time because of all the extra slack that I was pulling through to tie each of the knots, but I eventually figured out by trial and error that it was easiest to make a big loop with the twine and put my entire hand through it to grab all the excess twine and pull it back through. It took 3 to 4 knots between each ball, and the trick was to tie one knot and then tie the other knots around that first knot, which created one big wider knot instead of a lot of smaller knots in a row. I followed this method of stringing the ornaments and tying knots in between them all the way along the garland until I reached the end, and I'm gonna go ahead and speed this up a little bit because I think you guys get the idea. From visiting Morgan's Light, I learned a really alarming statistic that across the U.S., 1 in 3 women between the ages of 18 and 24 are victims of physical, emotional, or verbal abuse from their dating partner. As I mentioned, I'll provide a link to Morgan's Light in the description box below, and if you feel led, you can make a donation, but I truly hope that regardless of whether you make a donation or not, that you'll check out the website so you can learn more. And I want to thank Teresa and Corey for sharing Morgan's Light and allowing me to learn more about this important issue. We haven't put up our regular Christmas tree yet, so I just have this here on my kitchen counter, but this could be used as an actual garland or in a vignette or a tiered tray. The options are really endless here, and there's so many different kinds and colors of Christmas balls, so you can really take this idea and run with it. For my next project, I'm mixing two different gnomes I saw on the Kirkland's website. I really liked the brown furry beard for the first one, but I also liked the Christmas ball ornament ones too. So I think I've come up with something that is sort of marrying the two together. I had these plastic Christmas balls from Dollar Tree left over from last year, and I thought the furry fashion scarf, also from Dollar Tree, would work great for the beard. I found one of the seams and was able to open that up and stick the ball inside. Then it was just a matter of pulling the slack and gluing down the fabric around the ball. Since the fabric was furry, it was really easy to disguise any cuts I made by just overlapping the fabric a bit and gluing it down. For the hat, I wanted it to be green, and I had some scraps of this scarf from Dollar Tree left over from my fabric-covered beaded garland from a couple weeks ago, so I just cut a little triangle out of that. Now, I am not a sewer, so this is a no-sew hat, but I did want to have an ornament hanger loop coming out of the top of the hat. I tied a loop out of the twine and laid it down on top of the triangle. Now here's the tricky part. You have to place the loop upside down. I know that seems backwards, but that's so that when the fabric is turned right side out, the loop is sticking out of the top. To protect the twine and make sure it doesn't get glued in the process, I covered it with some painter's tape. Then it was time to glue. This particular fabric wasn't that different on the front versus the back, but if the fabric that you use is, just remember that the triangle on the table is right side up and the piece that I'm gluing to it is right side down. I trimmed off the excess fabric, and when I turned the hat right side out, I knew I had added the hanger correctly because there it was, sticking out of the top. Next, I stuffed his little hat with some extra polyfill that I had left over from previous projects, but you can use whatever you have on hand. You can even stuff the extra fabric in there if you want, or I've used plastic grocery store bags before too. For his nose, I just used a wood bead I had from an Amazon badge. I can link the ones I used in the description box below, but you can just really use whatever you have on hand. Then I glued the hat down with hot glue, and as a final touch I decided to make a cuff to his little hat, and I just trimmed off the end of an actual cuff to a thrifted sweater I had on hand. As a substitute, you could use a piece of burlap or even a strip of ribbon. You can actually see some of the Dollar Tree ribbon on my workspace that I almost used before remembering that I had the sweater. Just use your imagination and embellish with what you have on hand. And here he is. Isn't he handsome? I really love how he turned out, and I especially love his brown furry beard because that's a little different than most of the gnomes I see around. Let me know in the comments what you think of this one and whether you're still on the gnome train. I feel like I was a little late to the gnome game, so it's still going strong in my mind. For my final project today, I'm going to try my hand at this slatted ornament I saw on the Walmart website. Now, the one on their website was $36. It didn't list the dimensions, so I'm just assuming that it's one of those large, oversized, sign-sized ornaments, but what I'm making is a mini version to use as an actual ornament. I started with some popsicle sticks from Dollar Tree, and instead of the darker brown of the original, I wanted to make a grayer wood tone. So for this, I used a combination of antique wax and the elephant chalk paint, both by Waverly. I used a chippy brush to apply both colors to the sticks and then blended with a baby wipe. After that initial coat, I used the baby wipe to add more of each color. I love doing this because it applies the paint in a very thin layer so you can still see the natural grain of the wood through it. So my plan was to have 7 slats to the ornament with 2 sticks running vertically down the back to hold them together. And I knew it would be too difficult to cut through 2 sticks together at the top where it's rounded, so I cut the top piece on its own and glued it down first. Next, I glued the remaining sticks, leaving a small space between each slat. 7 sticks ended up being the perfect size for the ornament, and once those were glued down, I traced a circle using a ribbon holder from Dollar Tree as my guide. Then I cut the edges off with scissors. That exposed the bare wood around the edges, so I quickly went over them with a baby wipe and more of the antique wax. Next, I created a metal top to the ornament using a foil pan from Dollar Tree left over from a previous project. I had already given the pan my galvanized treatment using the colors Elephant and Granite Gray. I'll link another tutorial in a card above to show how I did the galvanized technique, but you could also just use the bare tin. You'll see that the pie tin had a design to the bottom, and I cut out one of those little trapezoid shapes. I folded the piece of foil like a fan and then cut it in half and glued that down to the top of my ornament. Next, I knotted a piece of twine in a loop and glued it to the back so that just a slight bit of the loop was poking out of the top. To finish the piece off, I embellished with a couple green sprigs, a red bow with gold trim, and a few flocked mini pine cones. I think I want to try this in different colors. I think a white ornament with buffalo check ribbon and red berries would look really nice. And here it is on my counter. You could easily add a hook to it to hang on a tree, but this could also work for a tiered tray, I think. And those popsicle sticks come in a pack of about 60, so you could easily make a bunch of ornaments to give away for really cheap. Thanks for joining me today. If you found me from the Crafting for a Cause playlist, I'd love for you to stick around and subscribe. Be sure to hit the notification bell so you can stay up to date with my content. And don't forget to check out Morgan's Light. The only way to change those statistics is to inform ourselves, so I have their website linked in the description box below. Hope everyone has a wonderful weekend, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!